any questions. If anybody has any questions of Mr. Ball, all right, then I would expect that if there's any commissioners that wish to make any proposed amendments, this would be the time to do that. Commissioner Robinson?
I'm going to have a lot, so if anybody wants to interrupt me with theirs, that I would not be insulted. I've watched various incarnations of this plan over the past 5+ years. Some of my proposed changes will probably relate to Mr. Ball's presentation, and others from the perspective of living this, as I said, for the past 5 years. I'm going to start with Chapter 3 and then work my way back to Chapter 2. And what I'm just going to mention the bullet points of the changes, but I'm happy to provide Ms. Mitchell and Mr. Ball with those, with the language that I'm using, so that it would be easier for you to incorporate should those proposed changes be approved. So here goes. So I'm going to start in Chapter 3, as I said, land use. And so my proposal is to designate Bryan's Road as a mixed-use village as proposed originally in the merged scenario, which was several incarnations of the plan, rather than the growth center. And again, I probably have about 2 or 3 paragraphs to explain why I wish to do that. I'm also suggesting that we apply the rural conservation land use designation to the area of Marshall Hall, as make it rural residential and designate this area as Tier 4 on the septic tier map. And I understand, Mr. Ball, as you said, if we make changes to the tier map, that would in turn require a public hearing.
It may not, depending on the analysis that MDP does.
I would also like to see us apply the rural conservation land use designation for the Marbury, Risen, Nanjemoy areas, and designate this area as Tier 4 on the septic tier map, as pointed out in Senate Bill 236.
Do you have it in writing so we don't have to make the notes?
I do. I will have it in writing. I'm reading notes now, but I will put it into a document and be happy to share with all of you. As I said, I would do that to make life easier on Ms. Mitchell and Mr. Ball.
Thank you.
Additionally, I'd like to apply a zoning density of 1 to 20 in the Watershed Conservation District, and apply that Watershed Conservation District land use designation to the land surrounding Maryland Airport and the forested Indian Head Tech Park site, rather than as an employment and industrial park district. Getting to what Mr. Ball mentioned in some of the comments, I would eliminate the development district, which stretches from St. Charles to the Potomac River, and replace it with a right-size priority funding area to be consistent with the areas targeted for development. Let me just one other thing here. No, actually, that's it for Chapter 3, so I'm sorry, Commissioner Stewart, if you want to.
Commissioner Stewart?
Okay. To piggyback off of the last statement you just made, regarding the development district, I would have a proposed amendment that the development district would mirror the priority funding area, and that any area outside of the priority funding area that's currently zoned as development district, that we address that for the appropriate change at our next work session. So with respect to the land use, so we're changing it from development district to another land use. I would appreciate staff coming back with information about suggestions of if making that change. I have my own suggestions, but I would prefer to have that conversation at our next work session. Also, I would propose at our next work session having a detailed, specific conversation about the land use regarding the conservation, watershed conservation area with respect to the 1,160 acres of land off of Billingsley Road. I want to make sure that I'm on record that I want to make sure we have a conversation about that at our next work session. And I do have a question with respect to my previous statement. I have my question is what is the current zoning for the development district, residential district outside of the PFA? So we come back on next week, we can have that detailed conversation about the current zoning.
It's residential, it has different degrees of density. But it's
Right, but if we can come back next week and talk about the current density. And I do have a couple other items. With respect to the current plan, if you go to Chapter 3, number 11, under suburban large lot districts, it states that the development in these areas are 1 unit per acre. And it's for, if I'm correct, if I'm reading this correctly, it's Tier 2 and Tier 3. But then when I go to number 12 and look at rural residential district, I believe that there is a lot of gray area in that statement, and I want to clarify that. For the rural residential district, it states that the development is 1 unit per 3 acres while preserving the rural character and open space whenever possible. I would make a proposed amendment that we strengthen that language to delete whenever possible. And also, the third paragraph states that rural residential districts are intended to accommodate residential densities up to 1 dwelling per acre with a cluster development practices, provided the overall gross density remains at 1 unit per 3 acres. I would like for us to strengthen that language so rural residential district is 1 to 3, leaving suburban large lot districts at 1 to 1.
You could send me those
I will.
references, that would help.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And come back to me. Thank you.
Oh, I have more, but let's let others go. Okay. I'm going to move on to Chapter 4, the water resource element. This was a concern of mine dating back to the 2006 comprehensive plan, which I believe previous Board of Commissioners, which I served, just agreed to pass it just to put it on the shelf so that we would get it right in this comprehensive plan. And I'm not real comfortable with the way it is currently addressed. I would like to see it consistent with state guidelines and that realistically addresses drinking water availability. We've seen reports from the Maryland Geological Survey indicating that we're going to have shortages sometime between 2030 and 2040, and there's nothing in here that addresses that. And additionally, and this is something that did not come up during any of the public hearings or comments, we rely almost entirely on aquifers for our drinking water. And sitting underneath Charles County is something called the Taylorsville Basin, which on the Virginia side of the Potomac River, licenses have been given for fracking, which could have an absolutely horrible adverse effect on our drinking water. And I'd like to see something in the comp plan that bans fracking in Charles County, such as was done by our neighbors to the north in Prince George's County, who recently banned fracking. So I'd like to see that as being part of the water resource element as well. Moving along to the natural...
Excuse me, are you making that a proposed amendment?
Yeah, that would be, right. But I think everything that I'm saying would be a proposed amendment, but right now it's just
to be clear.
Right. Natural resource protection. I suggest that we protect our waterways with 1 to 20 zoning in the Mattawoman Stream Valley and 1 to 10 zoning in all other stream valleys. We only have one chance to get this right in terms of saving the Mattawoman as well as every other tributary that leads into the Potomac and ultimately the Chesapeake. Let's get it right this time. I'd also like to see us establish a Mattawoman-Nanjemoy rural legacy area such as we have in the Zakiah Swamp, and also include Nanjemoy, Mattawan, and Zakiah in the priority preservation area. The current plan only calls for a PPA in the Cobb Neck area, and I think we're missing an opportunity here to preserve. And then I guess, we can discuss this later after we go through the next changes of including a schedule that identifies who does what once we pass a plan. I know that zoning is next, and I just want to make sure that we have a calendar that keeps track of everything that's happening and a schedule of when that would happen. And then just in more generic terms, this is my last thing, and this goes back to what's mentioned in Chapter 2, that as a member of the board of the Council of Governments, or COG, that I serve on, I recently received a briefing in which Charles County leads every other jurisdiction in the greater Washington area in growth projections over the next several decades. And so I realize it's a chicken and egg thing, but if my proposed changes are agreed to in the new comp plan, then I would like to see a recalculation of those projected growth numbers for the county so that we get down into the area that the state of Maryland is growing at, as well as our neighbors, both in the more urban and rural areas. So I will provide all of this in writing within the next day or so. I'll put all my notes together. So with that, I thank you.
Respond to your slide number 11 regarding Chapter 11, the priority preservation area. I believe it was already mentioned, but just again, I know based on a conversation I've had with you, Mr. Ball, my concern, and I do support that. So I don't know, since you have it in your presentation, if we need to make a proposed amendment, but I would make a proposed amendment just to be clear that I support including the western part of Nanjemoy in the preservation area, making sure that we are preserving the land across the entire county, just not in one area.
That's it? Okay. Any other proposed amendments at this time? No? Okay, thank you. Well, we will have another work session, so of course you'll have an opportunity to get these, take a look at those, and then anybody, of course, is welcome to bring additional proposed amendments at the next work session. Okay. Well, we want to thank you.
Next on the,
Thank